My son-in-law's family thought I was just some embarrassing old man they had to tolerate at Sunday dinner. They mocked my thrift store clothes, laughed at my simple lifestyle, and made jokes about how I didn't understand modern money. Richard even suggested I might need help making basic decisions. His mother, Patricia, the retired judge, kept shaking her head like I was some charity case her successful family had to manage. My name is Bill Ways, and what they didn't know was that I'd been playing a role, and I was about to give them the performance of their lives. You see, sometimes the most dangerous person at the table is the one everyone underestimates. Like a wolf in sheep's clothing, except I was a billionaire in a bargain basement flannel. This story has more reversals than a championship chess match, and every move was calculated from the very beginning. If you're someone who's ever been underestimated because of how you look or where you come from, make sure you're subscribed, because this is going to be a masterclass in patience, strategy, and the sweet taste of justice served ice cold. I sat there that afternoon, letting them think they had me figured out, while I quietly recorded every condescending word, because sometimes the best way to expose someone's true character is to give them exactly what they think they want, a victim. But I was never the victim in this story. They had no idea who they were really talking to. It was 2:30 on a Sunday afternoon when I sat at Jennifer's dining room table, wearing my oldest flannel shirt and discount store jeans. Her husband Richard kept glancing at me like I was some charity case they'd dragged in off the street. Jennifer's mother-in-law, Patricia, the retired judge, barely looked up from her phone. "Dad, we're really concerned about your living situation," Jennifer said, cutting her prime rib with surgical precision. "That little apartment above the hardware store isn't suitable for someone your age." Richard nodded gravely. "Bill, I've been observing your behavior patterns, short-term memory issues, difficulty with complex decision-making. As a psychiatrist, I have to say I'm worried about your cognitive decline." Patricia finally looked up. "Minnesota has excellent guardianship provisions, very streamlined process when family members need to step in." I spooned some mashed potatoes, playing the part perfectly. "Well, I suppose you folks know better than I do about these things. Never was much good with paperwork and such." Jennifer exchanged a look with Richard. "Exactly, Dad, which is why we think it's time someone else handled your finances. Richard says there are legal ways to make sure you're protected." "Protected from what?" I asked, letting my voice shake just a little. "From making decisions that could hurt you," Richard said smoothly. "Someone with your limitations could easily be taken advantage of. Scammers target elderly people all the time." I nodded slowly, like I was struggling to understand. Inside, I was cataloging every word. You see, what they didn't know was that I'd sold Pinnacle Dynamics, my AI defense systems company, for $1.2 billion just 18 months ago. They also didn't know that every word of this conversation was being recorded on the device hidden in my shirt pocket. "I guess I never thought about it that way," I said, reaching for more gravy. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need someone smarter to handle things." Patricia smiled for the first time all afternoon. "It's settled then. I know just the judge who handles these cases quickly." What they didn't know was that I'd been playing a much longer game than any of them could imagine. Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this betrayal didn't happen overnight. Jennifer used to be my pride and joy. Valedictorian at Northwestern, MBA from Wharton, everything a father could want in a daughter. When she married Richard Hamilton 5 years ago, I thought she'd found her match, a respected psychiatrist from a good family. His mother, Patricia, had been a district court judge for 23 years before retiring. On paper, they looked perfect. But money changes people, and the kind of money I had, that changes them faster. After the Pinnacle Dynamics sale, Jennifer's lifestyle exploded overnight. The modest condo became a $2.3 million house in Edina. The Honda became a Tesla. Richard suddenly needed a bigger practice, better equipment, designer suits for court appearances. Jennifer's credit card bills hit $85,000 a year on clothes, vacations, and what she called networking expenses. The problem was, I'd been careful about how much they knew about my wealth. I'd given them a comfortable life, sure, but I never flashed the real numbers. Old habits from building pinnacle from nothing. You don't show your cards until you're ready to play them. Richard's private practice was drowning in debt. $340 in equipment loans, malpractice insurance skyrocketing, patient volume dropping as healthcare consolidated. I'd helped them out a few times, always framing it as modest gifts from a father who worked hard and saved his pennies. They thought I was maybe worth a few million tops. Then came the questions. Jennifer started asking about my estate planning. Richard would casually mention how unstructured my finances seemed. Patricia began dropping hints about how elderly people often lose track of their assets. "Dad, you really should have someone professional looking after your investments," Jennifer had said 6 months ago. "Someone qualified to make sure you don't lose everything to some scam." I'd played along, acting confused about basic financial concepts. "Oh, I just keep most everything in checking accounts. Banks are safer than the stock market, aren't they?" Richard had actually flinched when I said that. "Bill, that's not how money works anymore. Inflation alone is eating away your savings every day. You leave it sitting there." What they didn't realize was that my simple financial setup was actually a sophisticated structure of trusts, offshore holdings, and corporate entities that had taken my legal team 3 years to perfect. The Ways Family Trust alone had provisions they had never bothered to read, including a moral turpitude clause on page 67, subsection 12C, that would automatically disinherit anyone who attempted to defraud or manipulate the family. But I'd learned to read people during 40 years of building a business, and I was reading them loud and clear. The way Jennifer's eyes lit up when she thought I wasn't looking. The way Richard started asking specific questions about my memory problems. The way Patricia began volunteering legal advice about guardianship procedures. 3 months ago, Jennifer started insisting I see a doctor for routine checkups. Always Richard's colleagues, never my longtime physician. They'd ask me questions designed to make me seem confused, then exchange meaningful glances when I gave simple answers. "Mr. Ways, what year is it?" one of them had asked. 2024, last time I checked, I'd replied with a chuckle. "And who's the current president?" I'd paused, playing up the act. "Well now, that would be Trump, wouldn't it? Just got inaugurated this January." More glances, more notes on their clipboards. The truth was, I'd been watching them just as carefully as they'd been watching me. When you've negotiated defense contracts with 3-star generals and closed deals with Fortune 500 CEOs, you develop an instinct for when someone's running a game on you. And this was definitely a game. The final piece fell into place 2 weeks ago when I accidentally overheard Jennifer on the phone with someone talking about guardianship timelines and how long the legal process would take. She'd been standing in my kitchen thinking I was napping in the next room. "Richard says the evaluation's just a formality," she'd whispered. "Mom already talked to Judge Morrison about expediting the paperwork. We could have control of his assets within 60 days. That's when I knew for certain what I was dealing with. This wasn't a concern for an aging father's welfare. This was a coordinated effort to declare me incompetent and seize control of wealth they didn't even know existed. But here's what Jennifer didn't know about her old dad. I hadn't survived 4 decades in the defense industry by being naive about human nature. I'd seen enemies in boardrooms and allies in foxholes. I'd learned to distinguish between family loyalty and family greed, and I'd been preparing for this conversation a lot longer than she had. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who looked embarrassed to be there. "Mr. Ways, I'm sorry to bother you, sir, but I need to serve you these documents. Hennepin County Court Case Number CV 224-12856, Petition for Emergency Guardianship, filed by Jennifer Ways Hamilton, citing concerns about my diminished mental capacity and inability to manage financial affairs." I sat in my small apartment, reading through the legalese while my coffee went cold. Richard's psychiatric evaluation was attached. 3 pages of clinical language that painted me as a confused old man slipping into dementia. Memory loss, impaired judgment, inability to understand complex financial concepts, It was a masterpiece of professional manipulation. The evaluation cited specific examples. My confusion about modern banking, my tendency to keep large amounts of cash, my failure to understand investment strategies. All things I deliberately displayed during their carefully orchestrated examinations. But the timeline bothered me. The evaluation was dated 6 weeks ago, yet Richard had never asked me to come in for any formal testing, which meant either he'd fabricated the entire assessment, or those routine checkups Jennifer had arranged were actually formal competency evaluations conducted without my knowledge. Both scenarios were illegal. Both were grounds for medical license suspension. I called my longtime attorney, Lawrence Mitchell, from the secure line I'd had installed in my apartment. "Bill, I've been expecting this call," Lawrence said. "I've been monitoring the court filings in Hennepin County like you asked. This guardianship petition has some unusual characteristics." "Such as?" "The expedited timeline, for one. Usually these cases take months to work their way through the system. This one's scheduled for preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. Someone called in favors." Lawrence had been handling my legal affairs since I started Pinnacle Dynamics. He understood the complexity of my financial structure better than anyone, including the various protective clauses I'd insisted on when establishing the trust. "There's something else," he continued. "The petition lists your estimated assets as approximately $3.2 million, mostly real estate and savings accounts. That's interesting, considering your actual net worth." I almost smiled. "They're planning to steal what they think is $3 million. They have no idea they're actually targeting over $1 billion. "Bill, there's another problem. The assigned judge is Thomas Morrison. He's Patricia Hamilton's former clerk from when she was on the bench. This has the appearance of judge shopping." Judge shopping, the practice of maneuvering a case to a specific judge who might be sympathetic to your cause. In family court, it happened more often than the public realized. But when the petitioner's mother-in-law was a retired judge with connections throughout the system, it became almost inevitable. What are our options? Legally, we can challenge the competency evaluation, demand independent psychiatric testing, and file for dismissal based on insufficient evidence. But Bill, Lawrence paused, "if you want my advice, we should also consider whether this goes deeper than simple family greed." He was right. The coordination level suggested more than opportunistic relatives. Richard's willingness to risk his medical license, Patricia's use of judicial connections, Jennifer's systematic documentation of my supposed incompetence. This felt like a practiced operation. "Lawrence, I need you to research something for me. Look into other guardianship cases handled by Judge Morrison in the past 2 years. Specifically, cases involving elderly people with significant assets where family members petitioned for control." "You think this is part of a pattern?" "I think my family might have stumbled into something bigger than they realize. And if that's true, we're going to need help beyond what either of us can provide." I hung up and stared at the petition again. The language was too polished, too comprehensive for a family acting alone. Someone had coached them through this process. Someone who knew exactly how to manipulate the guardianship system to achieve maximum results with minimum oversight. But they'd made one critical error in their planning. They'd assumed I was actually the confused old man they were portraying to the court. And then I received the phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Ways, this is Agent Amanda Foster with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We need to talk." I'd been expecting this call for almost 2 years, ever since Pinnacle Dynamics started receiving inquiries from federal agencies about our cybersecurity contracts. What I hadn't expected was the timing. "Agent Foster, I assume this is about the defense contracts?" "Partially, but we're calling about your family situation. We've been monitoring an elder financial abuse network operating across the upper Midwest, and your case has several markers that suggest you're being targeted by people connected to this organization." I sat down hard. This was bigger than family greed. "How long have you known?" "We've had Richard Hamilton's medical practice under surveillance for 8 months. His billing patterns caught Medicare fraud investigators' attention last spring. Unnecessary psychiatric evaluations, inflated consultation fees, patients who don't exist in any other medical records. When we started digging deeper, We found connections to guardianship cases across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Agent Foster's voice was crisp, professional. Mr. Ways, we know about Pinnacle Dynamics. We know about the $1.2 billion sale. We also know that information isn't public record, which means someone with access to sealed federal contract databases leaked your financial status to this network. The implications hit me like a freight train. My family wasn't just greedy, they'd been recruited. Who else knows? That's where it gets complicated. Patricia Hamilton retired from the bench 18 months ago, right around the time these guardianship cases started accelerating. During her final year, she handled more elderly competency hearings than any other judge in the district. Most resulted in family members gaining control of significant assets. You're saying she was running guardianship scams from the bench? We're saying there's a pattern. Elderly people with substantial but hidden wealth, family members who suddenly develop concerns about mental capacity, medical evaluations that support guardianship petitions, quick court hearings with predetermined outcomes. Agent Foster paused. Mr. Ways, we believe your daughter and her husband are being used as assets in a larger operation. The question is whether they know it or whether they think they're running their own independent scam. I thought about Jennifer's phone conversation, Richard's sudden interest in my finances, Patricia's confident predictions about legal timelines. They think they're in control, which makes them perfect for our purposes. We'd like to offer you a deal, Mr. Ways. Help us document this network, and we'll make sure your family faces charges appropriate to their actual level of involvement, rather than the federal conspiracy charges they're technically guilty of. It wasn't really a choice. The FBI had evidence of a criminal network that happened to include my family. I could cooperate and potentially save Jennifer and Richard from decades in federal prison, or I could fight it and watch them go down with the larger conspiracy. What would cooperation look like? We need recorded evidence of how this network operates, how they recruit family members, how they coordinate medical evaluations with friendly physicians, how they manipulate court schedules to get favorable judges. Your case is perfect because you have access to all the major players. Agent Foster explained the technical details. One-party consent recording laws in Minnesota would make any conversations I initiated admissible in court. The FBI would provide equipment and guidance, but I'd need to interact with my family naturally, encouraging them to explain their processes. Mr. Ways, I have to ask, are you prepared to help us prosecute your own daughter? I stared out the window of my small apartment, thinking about the little girl who used to help me build circuit boards in my garage, who graduated summa cum laude and called me every Sunday for years before the money changed everything. Agent Foster, my daughter chose her path when she decided to steal from her father instead of simply asking for help. If she's part of a criminal network that's targeting vulnerable elderly people across the region, then she needs to face the consequences of that choice. There's one more thing, Agent Foster said. We have reason to believe this network has targeted other tech entrepreneurs in the region, people who sold companies or received large defense contracts. The pattern suggests someone with access to federal databases is providing target lists. That meant this wasn't random. Someone had specifically identified me as a potential victim based on classified information about Pinnacle Dynamics contracts and sale details. Who has that level of access? We're investigating several possibilities. But Mr. Ways, this means you're not just helping us catch your family in guardianship fraud. You're helping us uncover what might be a national elder abuse network with connections to federal contract databases. I made my decision. What do you need me to do? Keep playing the confused old man. Let them think their plan is working. But instead of passively waiting for them to steal your money, we're going to actively document exactly how they do it. Agent Foster's next words changed everything about how I understood this situation. Mr. Ways, you're not the victim in this case. You're our undercover asset. And 3 days later, I met with Kevin Torres, a private investigator the FBI had been working with on the elder abuse cases. What he showed me made my blood run cold. Mr. Ways, your daughter hired a surveillance team 6 months ago. They've been documenting your daily routines, photographing your apartment, even going through your trash. But here's the interesting part. They're not the only ones watching you. Kevin spread out a series of photographs across the table in his downtown Minneapolis office. Time-stamped images of Jennifer's car parked across from my apartment building, Richard sitting in coffee shops where he could observe my comings and goings, a woman I didn't recognize taking pictures of my mailbox. This woman is Sandra Chen, a former insurance investigator, now working as a freelance asset researcher. She specializes in locating hidden wealth for divorce attorneys and family courts. Your daughter paid her $15,000 to conduct a comprehensive financial background check. The photographs told a story of systematic stalking. For 6 months, while I thought I was carefully managing my interactions with my family, they'd been building a complete dossier of my habits, contacts, and apparent financial status. The surveillance reports are fascinating reading, Kevin continued. They note that you shop exclusively at discount stores, drive a 15-year-old Honda, and live in what they describe as substandard housing for someone of his alleged wealth. They concluded you're either hiding assets or experiencing significant financial decline. What about my actual activities? Kevin pulled out another folder. This is where it gets interesting. They documented your weekly visits to what they thought was a social services office downtown, except that building houses the FBI field office. They photographed you meeting with what they assumed were social workers, but we've identified at least 3 federal agents in their surveillance photos. I stared at the images. There I was, walking into the federal building for my preliminary meetings with Agent Foster, completely unaware that my own family was documenting what they thought was evidence of my mental decline. They interpreted your FBI meetings as visits to social services for elderly assistance programs. The surveillance report actually recommends using this as evidence of your inability to manage your own affairs. Kevin showed me the timeline they'd constructed. December, first surveillance begins. January, regular pattern of concerning behavior documented. February, medical consultations increase. March, legal consultation with Patricia Hamilton. April, formal psychiatric evaluation scheduled. Mr. Ways, they've been planning this guardianship petition since Christmas. Every interaction you've had with them since then has been part of a coordinated information gathering operation. But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. We also have 240 hours of audio recordings from devices they placed in your apartment. My apartment. They'd been inside my home, planting listening devices while I was out. How did they get access? Jennifer has a key, obviously, but the sophistication of the equipment suggests professional installation. This wasn't a family member hiding a voice recorder behind a picture frame. These are commercial-grade devices that transmit to remote receivers. Kevin played a sample recording. My voice, crystal clear, talking to Lawrence Mitchell about trust fund structures and asset protection strategies. Conversations I'd thought were private, where I discussed the real scope of my wealth and my growing suspicions about my family's motives. They have recordings of you discussing your actual net worth, Mr. Ways. They know about the $1.2 billion. They know about the trust structures. They know you've been playing confused deliberately. The implications were staggering. If they knew I was wealthy and knew I was pretending to be confused, then the guardianship petition wasn't about protecting a confused old man. It was a calculated theft operation targeting someone they knew was mentally competent. But here's the twist, Kevin said. Based on the surveillance reports and recordings, they don't believe you're actually incompetent. The guardianship petition is filed under false pretenses that they know are false. That's not elder abuse anymore. That's federal conspiracy to commit fraud. Kevin showed me the final piece of evidence. Financial records showing payments from Richard Hamilton's practice to Sandra Chen, to the surveillance team, and to what appeared to be a consulting company called Midwest Asset Recovery. Midwest Asset Recovery is the key, Mr. Ways. They specialize in what they call family wealth reunification. They identify elderly people with hidden assets, then coach family members through guardianship proceedings that transfer control of those assets to younger relatives. It's guardianship fraud as a business model. I studied the financial records. Richard had paid Midwest Asset Recovery $45,000 over the past 8 months. Jennifer had made additional payments totaling $23,000. This wasn't a spontaneous family decision driven by genuine concern. This was a professional service they had purchased. How many other families have they targeted? Across 5 states, we've identified at least 37 cases with similar patterns. Elderly people with significant but hidden wealth, family members who suddenly develop concerns about mental capacity, expedited court proceedings with predetermined outcomes, total stolen assets, approximately $89 million. Kevin leaned back in his chair. Mr. Weiss, your family didn't just decide to steal from you. They hired a company that specializes in teaching people how to steal from their elderly relatives. The recordings continued playing in the background, my own voice discussing financial strategies, completely unaware that every word was being transmitted to people planning to use that information to destroy me. But as devastating as this evidence was, Kevin had saved the worst revelation for last. Mr. Weiss, there's something else you need to know. Based on the timeline and the sophistication of this operation, we believe your family was recruited for this scheme before Jennifer ever married Richard. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. This was a long-term operation that began with your daughter's relationship. Lawrence Mitchell's conference room felt like a war room when I arrived the next morning. FBI agent Foster was there, along with 2 federal prosecutors and a stack of documents that would change everything. Bill, we're ready to activate the nuclear option, Lawrence said, sliding a familiar document across the table. The Weiss Family Trust, page 67, subsection 12C. I'd almost forgotten about that clause. When we'd established the trust 5 years ago, Lawrence had insisted on including provisions that would protect the family wealth from various threats. The moral turpitude clause was designed to automatically disinherit any beneficiary who attempted to defraud, manipulate, or harm other family members. The clause is triggered by any attempt to gain control of trust assets through false or fraudulent means, Lawrence explained. Jennifer's guardianship petition, filed with knowledge of your actual mental competence, constitutes attempted fraud against the trust. The moment she filed those papers, she legally disinherited herself. Agent Foster opened her laptop. We're also ready to freeze all accounts associated with Midwest Asset Recovery and their known associates. This includes Richard's practice accounts, Jennifer's personal banking, and Patricia Hamilton's consulting income. The federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Bradley, laid out the larger strategy. Mr. Weiss, we're not just prosecuting your family for guardianship fraud. We're using your case as the cornerstone of a federal racketeering investigation. The RICO Act allows us to treat this elder abuse network as an organized criminal enterprise. What does that mean for Jennifer and Richard? If they're willing to cooperate and provide evidence against the larger network, they're looking at 5 to 7 years in federal prison. If they fight the charges and force us to prove the full conspiracy, they're looking at 25 to life. Lawrence opened the trust document to the relevant page. Bill, there's something else. The moral turpitude clause doesn't just remove Jennifer as a beneficiary. It requires her to pay restitution to the trust for any damages caused by her fraudulent actions. Legal fees, investigation costs, damaged reputation, everything. I read the clause carefully. My lawyers had crafted it to be ironclad. Any beneficiary who engaged in fraudulent conduct would not only lose their inheritance, but become financially liable to the trust for all resulting damages. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $2.3 million in direct costs, legal fees, FBI investigation expenses, forensic accounting, damaged business relationships. If we include punitive damages, it could reach $8 million. Agent Foster pulled up financial records on her laptop. We've also documented how they spent the $68,000 they paid to Midwest Asset Recovery and associated services, surveillance equipment, fraudulent medical evaluations, legal consulting for guardianship proceedings. All of it paid for with money they borrowed against your expected inheritance. And the irony was devastating. They'd borrowed money to fund the operation to steal my money, using my own anticipated wealth as collateral. There's more, Prosecutor Bradley said. We've identified the source of your financial information. Someone with access to federal defense contract databases has been providing target lists to Midwest Asset Recovery. We're talking about a federal employee selling classified information about wealthy defense contractors to criminal networks. That explained how they'd known about the Pinnacle Dynamics sale. The transaction details weren't public record, but they were in federal databases related to defense industry oversight and national security clearances. Who has that access? We're narrowing it down. But Mr. Ways, this means your case isn't just about family betrayal. You're helping us uncover a national security breach that's been used to target elderly veterans and defense contractors across the country. Lawrence closed the trust document. Bill, you need to understand what we're proposing. When we activate the moral turpitude clause and freeze their assets, Jennifer and Richard will have no money for legal defense. They'll be facing federal racketeering charges with public defenders. What about Patricia Hamilton? Agent Foster's expression darkened. Retired Judge Hamilton is in a special category. Using her judicial connections to manipulate court assignments is a federal crime. Conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud while serving as a judge is a capital offense against the judicial system. The prosecutor explained the timeline. We'll execute the asset freezes tomorrow morning. Simultaneously, we'll serve federal subpoenas on all medical records related to your psychiatric evaluations. Richard Hamilton's medical license will be suspended pending investigation. The guardianship petition will be dismissed due to fraudulent basis. And then we offer them a choice, Agent Foster said. Cooperate fully with the investigation of Midwest Asset Recovery and the federal employee who's been selling target lists, or face the full weight of federal racketeering charges. Lawrence gathered the documents. Bill, there's one last thing. The trust clause gives you complete discretion over whether to pursue civil damages beyond the criminal charges. You could bankrupt them with civil litigation, or you could limit your claims to actual damages. I thought about Jennifer as a child, bringing me drawings of circuit boards and asking if she could help build computers. I thought about the woman who'd hired professionals to spy on her father and steal his life's work. I want them to face the full legal consequences of their choices, but I don't want to destroy them beyond what justice requires. Agent Foster nodded. Mr. Ways, there's something else you should know. When we arrest the Midwest Asset Recovery Network, we estimate we'll be able to return over $30 million in stolen assets to elderly victims across 5 states. Your cooperation isn't just protecting your own wealth, it's helping dozens of families recover money they thought was gone forever. But as satisfied as I felt about the legal strategy, Agent Foster's next words reminded me that the most dangerous part of this operation was still ahead. Mr. Ways, tomorrow we're going to spring the trap. But first, we need you to have one more conversation with your family. The phone call came at 11:47 p.m., just as I was preparing for what I thought would be the final phase of our operation. Mr. Ways, this is Agent Foster. We have a problem. A federal judge issued a temporary restraining order blocking our asset freezes. The order came from District Judge Margaret Chen in Minneapolis. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. How is that possible? Someone with detailed knowledge of our operation convinced Judge Chen that we're exceeding federal jurisdiction in a state family law matter. The motion was filed by a law firm that specializes in federal procedure, and it cited specific details about our surveillance methods that shouldn't be public knowledge. Agent Foster's voice was tight with frustration. Mr. Ways, we have a leak somewhere in the federal system. Someone warned Midwest Asset Recovery that we were moving against them. This changed everything. If the criminal network had advance warning of our operation, then every assumption we'd made about controlling the situation was wrong. What does this mean for Jennifer and Richard? It means they've lawyered up with people who know federal criminal procedure inside and out. High-end defense attorneys don't take guardianship fraud cases unless there's serious money involved, or unless they're working for a criminal organization with deep resources. I got dressed and met Agent Foster at the FBI field office downtown. When I arrived, I found a crisis command center. Multiple agents, computer screens showing financial networks, and a whiteboard covered with names and connections that painted a picture far more complex than we'd realized. Mr. Ways, we've been tracking money flows for the past 8 hours, Agent Foster explained. Midwest Asset Recovery isn't just a regional operation. They're connected to similar organizations in 12 states. Total estimated theft, over $400 million in the past 3 years. Special Agent in Charge Michael Rodriguez joined the briefing. Mr. Ways, we believe your case was specifically chosen to test our investigative capabilities. Someone wanted to know how much we'd learned about their network and how close we were to federal prosecution. The implications were staggering. My family hadn't just stumbled into a criminal scheme. They'd been selected as participants in a much larger operation designed to probe federal law enforcement capabilities. Who has the authority to issue restraining orders against FBI financial crimes investigations? Only federal judges with national security clearance, Agent Foster replied, and only when the investigation potentially involves classified information or threatens ongoing intelligence operations. Rodriguez pulled up an organizational chart on his laptop. Mr. Ways, Midwest Asset Recovery is connected to what appears to be a national network of legal professionals, medical practitioners, and retired judges who specialize in elder financial abuse. But the coordination level suggests this isn't just organized crime. This has characteristics of a foreign intelligence operation. Foreign intelligence. The words hit me like a physical blow. Someone is using elder abuse networks to gather intelligence on American defense contractors and their families, Rodriguez continued. Your Pinnacle Dynamics background makes you a perfect target for both financial theft and intelligence collection. Agent Foster showed me intercepts of communications between the legal team, now representing Jennifer and Richard. They're not just defending against guardianship fraud charges. They're actively gathering information about your defense contracts, your government relationships, and your knowledge of classified AI development programs. I stared at the evidence mounting on the conference room table. Financial records showing payments from offshore accounts. Communication intercepts revealing coordination across state lines. Legal documents filed in multiple jurisdictions with identical language patterns. Agent Foster, are you telling me that my daughter's marriage to Richard Hamilton was part of a foreign intelligence operation? We're telling you that the probability is high enough that we've transferred this investigation to the National Security Division. This isn't just about elder abuse anymore, Mr. Ways. This is about counterintelligence. Rodriguez opened a classified folder. Mr. Ways, I need to brief you on some information that will remain classified, but which you need to understand to make informed decisions about your family's involvement. For the next hour, I learned about a pattern of targeting that stretched back 5 years. Defense contractors, military retirees, and intelligence community veterans were being systematically targeted for both financial theft and intelligence collection. The operations were sophisticated enough to recruit family members who often had no idea they were participating in espionage activities. In most cases, the family members are true believers, Rodriguez explained. They genuinely think they're just stealing money from elderly relatives. They have no idea their handlers are foreign intelligence operatives collecting information about defense programs and classified technologies. What about Jennifer and Richard? Agent Foster reviewed their psychological profiles. Based on our analysis, they believe they're participating in a domestic criminal scheme to steal your money. We don't think they understand the national security implications of their actions. But Patricia Hamilton? Rodriguez's expression darkened. Retired Judge Hamilton is a different story. Her access to federal databases, her knowledge of classified case procedures, and her coordination with federal judges suggests a level of sophistication beyond opportunistic crime. I thought about Patricia's confident predictions about court timelines, her knowledge of federal procedure, her connections throughout the judicial system. You think she's a foreign asset? We think she's either a willing participant in intelligence operations or she's been compromised through financial leverage. Either way, she represents a threat to national security that goes far beyond your family situation. Agent Foster laid out our new reality. Mr. Ways, we can't proceed with the original plan. If we arrest Jennifer and Richard tomorrow, their new legal team will immediately file motions claiming selective prosecution and demanding disclosure of classified information about your Pinnacle Dynamics work. So, what are my options? Rodriguez closed the classified folder. You can withdraw your cooperation and let us handle this as a national security investigation. Your family will likely face federal charges related to espionage, even if they were unwitting participants. Or you can continue working with us, but understand that you're now part of a counterintelligence operation against a foreign network. I stared out the window at the Minneapolis skyline, thinking about how completely I'd misjudged the situation. What I'd thought was family greed had turned into foreign espionage. What I'd planned as justice for elder abuse had become a matter of national security. Agent Foster, if I walk away now, what happens to the other families being targeted by this network? Without your cooperation, we might catch the domestic criminals, but we probably won't identify the foreign operatives running the larger operation. Dozens of other defense contractor families will remain at risk. The choice was clear, even though it meant accepting that my daughter had become part of something far more dangerous than simple theft. What do you need me to do? 24 hours later, I was wearing a wire sophisticated enough to record conversations in 3 different rooms simultaneously. The FBI had transformed my apartment into a monitoring station with agents in the building next door, tracking every word through equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Mr. Ways, remember that your objective has changed, Agent Foster said as the technical team finished their final equipment checks. We're not just documenting guardianship fraud anymore. We need them to discuss their connections to the larger network, especially any contact with Patricia Hamilton's federal sources. The wire itself was invisible, integrated into the button of my flannel shirt with a transmission range of 2 miles. But more sophisticated was the psychological pressure I was about to apply. According to the FBI's behavioral analysis team, the key to getting Jennifer and Richard to reveal their larger connections was to make them believe their original plan was failing and they needed help from their handlers. I'd called Jennifer that morning using the script the FBI had provided. Honey, I've been thinking about what you said about getting someone to help me with my finances, I'd said, letting my voice shake with what sounded like genuine fear. But I'm worried about that guardianship thing. A friend told me those court proceedings can get complicated if someone challenges them. Jennifer had immediately taken the bait. Dad, don't worry about that. Richard and his mother have connections that can make sure everything goes smoothly. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? We can discuss some options that might be easier for everyone. Now I was sitting in their $2, $3 million house in Edina, surrounded by the luxury they'd purchased, with money they'd borrowed against my expected inheritance, about to betray them to federal agents while they tried to betray me to foreign operatives. The moral complexity was staggering. Richard opened a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Bill, Jennifer told me you're having second thoughts about the guardianship process. That's understandable. It can seem overwhelming. Well, I just heard that sometimes these things get challenged in court, and then lawyers get involved, and it becomes expensive and public, I said, playing my part perfectly. Patricia Hamilton leaned forward from her position on the living room sofa. Bill, that's exactly why we need to handle this efficiently. I have colleagues in the federal court system who can ensure the proceedings remain sealed and expedited. Federal court. The guardianship petition was filed in state court, but Patricia was talking about federal connections. Agent Foster had been right. They were coordinating with federal assets. Jennifer sat down next to me, her voice taking on the patronizing tone that had become familiar over the past months. Dad, the truth is that people like you, people with complicated financial backgrounds, sometimes attract attention from government agencies that can make life difficult. What kind of attention? Richard exchanged a look with Patricia before answering. Bill, your defense contracting work means certain agencies maintain files on your activities even after you retire. Sometimes those agencies have interests in how former contractors manage their wealth and who they associate with. This was it. They were acknowledging that my defense background made me a target for intelligence collection. I don't understand. Who would be interested in an old man's bank accounts? Patricia's smile was cold and professional. Let's just say there are people who pay very well for information about former defense contractors and their families. People who can also provide protection and assistance when legal complications arise. They were recruiting me, not just for financial theft, but for intelligence cooperation. Jennifer leaned closer. Dad, the people Richard's mother knows don't just help with guardianship proceedings. They can make sure that any government interest in your activities becomes manageable. In exchange for what? Nothing complicated, Richard said smoothly. Just occasional consultations about your former work. Technical discussions that help certain parties understand American defense capabilities. Very well compensated consultations. Agent Foster's voice crackled through my nearly invisible earpiece. Mr. Ways, they're offering to sell you to foreign intelligence handlers. Keep them talking about their contacts. I made my voice sound interested and confused. This sounds like something I should know more about before I make any decisions. Patricia stood up, walking to her purse. Bill, let me make a phone call. There's someone who can explain this much better than we can. She was calling her handler. Right now, with me wearing an FBI wire, she was about to connect me directly to a foreign intelligence operative. The next 5 minutes would either complete the most successful counterintelligence operation in recent FBI history or get me killed. Patricia returned from her phone call with a confident smile that didn't reach her eyes. Bill, there's someone who'd like to meet you tomorrow. Someone who can help clarify your options and ensure that any legal complications are resolved quickly and quietly. Agent Foster's voice in my earpiece was sharp. Mr. Ways, don't commit to any meeting. We need them to bring their contact here, tonight, while we have surveillance in place. I made my voice sound worried and confused. I don't know. Meeting with strangers makes me nervous. Couldn't they just call me, or maybe come here where I feel more comfortable? Richard leaned forward, his psychiatrist training evident in his manipulative tone. Bill, that's not how these things work. Important people don't make house calls to discuss sensitive matters. What sensitive matters? I asked, playing the confused elderly man perfectly. I thought we were talking about guardianship papers and bank accounts. Jennifer's mask of patience was starting to slip. Dad, it's more complicated than that. Your defense work means you have information that certain people find valuable. This isn't just about protecting your money, it's about protecting national interests. National interests. They were selling treason as patriotism. Patricia checked her phone and frowned. The schedule has changed. Our contact wants to have a preliminary conversation tonight. He's concerned that delay might create complications. Agent Foster's voice was urgent. They're being pressured by their handlers. The restraining order yesterday spooked someone higher up the chain. Stay calm and keep them talking. What kind of complications? I asked. Richard's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Bill, there are federal agencies that might misunderstand your situation if it becomes public. Agencies that might assume you're hiding assets for tax evasion or other purposes. Our contacts can prevent those misunderstandings. They were threatening me with federal prosecution while simultaneously offering to protect me from federal prosecution. It was psychological manipulation at its most sophisticated. The doorbell rang. Patricia smiled. That will be our colleague now. Bill, I want you to listen carefully to what he has to say. But instead of a foreign intelligence operative, two people I recognized walked into the living room. Agent Foster and Special Agent in Charge, Rodriguez, both wearing tactical vests and carrying federal credentials. Nobody move, Agent Foster announced. FBI, Patricia Hamilton, Richard Hamilton, Jennifer Ways Hamilton, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage, elder financial abuse, and violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. The room exploded into chaos. Jennifer lunged toward me, screaming accusations. Richard tried to reach for his phone before Rodriguez restrained him. Patricia simply sat down and smiled, like she'd been expecting this moment. You recorded us, Jennifer said, staring at me with a hatred I'd never seen before. Your own daughter. You recorded your own family. I removed the wire from my shirt button and set it on the coffee table. Jennifer, you hired professionals to spy on me for 6 months. You planted listening devices in my home. You paid doctors to falsify psychiatric evaluations. You were planning to steal everything I'd worked for my entire life. To protect you, she screamed. You're old and confused, and we were protecting you from people who would take advantage of you. Agent Foster was reading Miranda rights to Richard, whose face had gone completely white. Richard Hamilton, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. But Patricia Hamilton interrupted the proceedings with a laugh that chilled my blood. Agent Foster, you're making a mistake. Check your authorization codes for this arrest operation. Rodriguez frowned and spoke into his radio. After a moment, his expression changed to one of confusion and anger. Agent Foster, we have a problem. Federal Judge Morrison just issued an emergency stay on all arrest warrants in this case. We're ordered to release these individuals immediately. Patricia's smile widened. You see, Mr. Ways, you underestimated the depth of connections involved here. Judge Morrison was Patricia Hamilton's clerk for 15 years before she retired. This operation has protections you can't imagine. Agent Foster's radio crackled with urgent communications. Foster, this is command. We're showing multiple federal injunctions filed simultaneously in 3 districts. Someone with serious federal connections is shutting down this operation. I stared at Patricia Hamilton with growing understanding. You're not just connected to foreign intelligence. You have assets inside the federal judicial system. I have friends, Mr. Ways. Friends who understand that sometimes national security requires flexibility in how we interpret laws and procedures. Rodriguez was on his radio, speaking in rapid, frustrated tones with federal prosecutors. After several minutes, he turned back to us with an expression of barely controlled rage. We're ordered to withdraw. All charges suspended pending federal review of jurisdictional authority. As the FBI agents prepared to leave my daughter's house, Agent Foster pulled me aside. Mr. Ways, this isn't over. What we learned tonight proves this network has penetrated federal court system, but it also means you're now a target of people with resources we hadn't anticipated. Patricia Hamilton overheard and approached us with the confidence of someone who had just demonstrated her power. Mr. Ways, you've made some very dangerous enemies tonight, but the offer still stands. Cooperation with the right people can provide protection that even the FBI can't offer. She handed me a business card. Call this number within 48 hours. After that, protection becomes more expensive. The phone call that changed everything came at 6:18 a.m., exactly 36 hours after the FBI raid had been shut down by federal court orders. Mr. Ways, this is Deputy Director James Morrison with the FBI National Security Division. We need you at federal court in Minneapolis in 2 hours. Bring everything. When I arrived at the federal courthouse, I found a scene unlike anything I'd expected. News crews, federal marshals, and a convoy of black SUVs that suggested something far beyond a local criminal investigation. Deputy Director Morrison met me at the security entrance. Mr. Ways, 12 hours ago, the National Security Agency completed an analysis of communication intercepts related to your case. What we found led to the largest counterintelligence operation in Midwest history. Inside the federal building, I was briefed on an investigation that had expanded far beyond my family situation. The NSA intercepts had revealed that the Elder Abuse Network was indeed a foreign intelligence operation, but one that had penetrated federal court systems more deeply than anyone had imagined. Patricia Hamilton wasn't just connected to foreign operatives, Morrison explained. She was running a recruitment network that had compromised 12 federal judges, 37 attorneys with federal security clearances, and at least 6 employees with access to defense contractor databases. The scope was staggering. What had begun as my daughter's greed had uncovered a foreign intelligence network that had been operating inside the American legal system for over 5 years. Where does this leave my family? Jennifer and Richard are being offered plea agreements in exchange for cooperation. Given that they appear to have been unknowing participants in a larger espionage operation, they're looking at 5 years federal prison, followed by supervised probation. Morrison showed me arrest photos from across the Midwest. At 5 a.m. this morning, federal agents simultaneously arrested 83 people in 12 states. Patricia Hamilton was arrested at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, attempting to board a flight to Vienna with $2.3 million in cash and fake identification documents. The business card Patricia had given me 2 nights earlier had been equipped with NSA tracking technology. When I'd handed it over to Agent Foster, it had led intelligence agencies directly to a network of safe houses, communication centers, and financial operations that spanned half the country. Mr. Ways, your cooperation didn't just protect your assets or catch your family in guardianship fraud. You helped uncover the largest foreign intelligence penetration of the American legal system since World War II. But the personal cost was devastating. Morrison handed me legal documents showing that Jennifer had indeed forfeited her inheritance through the moral turpitude clause, and that both she and Richard faced civil liability for damages to the trust. The total damages exceed $8, $7 million when we include FBI investigation costs, federal court expenses, and compromised security clearances that had to be revoked and reinvestigated. I thought about Jennifer as a child, asking me to explain how computers worked, dreaming of following in my footsteps in technology and defense work. Deputy Director Morrison, my daughter made terrible choices, but she was manipulated by people far more sophisticated than she understood. I want her to face appropriate consequences, but I don't want to destroy her completely. Mr. Ways, that's your decision to make. The criminal charges are federal and non-negotiable, but the civil damages are within your discretion as the trust administrator. Morrison gathered the classified briefing materials. There's one more thing. The foreign intelligence operation your case exposed had targeted 17 other defense contractor families across the region. Your cooperation has allowed us to warn those families and prevent approximately $127 million in additional theft and intelligence compromise. As I left the federal courthouse, I realized that my decision to fight back against my family's betrayal had protected dozens of other families from similar devastation. But the hardest conversation was still ahead of me. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of the Wace Elder Protection Foundation, watching our legal team brief families of defense contractors about protecting themselves from similar targeting. The $500 million endowment I'd committed to the foundation was already funding research into elder financial abuse, legal advocacy for victims, and education programs for families of former military and defense personnel. It had given me a purpose more meaningful than anything I'd accomplished in business. Jennifer was serving her sentence at a minimum security federal facility in Minnesota. She'd written me twice, letters that showed she was finally beginning to understand the scope of what she'd been involved in and the damage her choices had caused to vulnerable elderly people across the region. I hadn't written back. Richard had lost his medical license permanently and was serving his sentence at a different facility. His psychiatric practice had been liquidated to pay restitution to Medicare and to compensate families of patients whose medical records he'd falsified for the guardianship fraud operation. Patricia Hamilton had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for espionage. The intelligence information recovered from her networks had required the government to review and strengthen security procedures for thousands of defense contractors and federal employees. Agent Foster, now promoted to head the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force, briefed me monthly on cases where our foundation's work had helped identify and prevent similar operations. The pattern recognition systems we'd funded had already protected over 200 families. But the most meaningful change was personal. I'd learned to distinguish between family loyalty and family manipulation, between love and exploitation, between protecting people and enabling their destructive choices. My relationship with Jennifer, if it ever resumed, would be based on her demonstrating genuine change rather than my hoping she would change. The Foundation's work with other families had taught me that real love sometimes requires establishing boundaries that feel harsh but create opportunities for authentic redemption. Lawrence Mitchell handled the legal aspects of the trust, which now included provisions that would prevent similar manipulation attempts in the future. My wealth was protected, But more importantly, it was being used to protect other families from the devastation mine had experienced. As I finished reviewing the Foundation's quarterly report, I realized that my daughter's betrayal had led me to a mission more important than anything I'd accomplished in my business career. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the path to the most meaningful thing you can do for others. And if this story resonated with you, please share it. Someone in your life might need to recognize these warning signs before it's too late. The Foundation continues to grow, and so does our ability to protect families like mine from predators who exploit the trust between generations.